Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we're going to be looking at the Obscura Operation Precon from Streets of New Capenna and its face commander, Kamiz Obscura Oculus, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Kamiz Obscura Oculus is a 2/4 Cephalid rogue that costs 1, a white, a blue, and a black with the following ability. Whenever you attack, target creature can't be blocked this turn. It connives. Then choose another attacking creature with lesser power. That creature gains double strike until end of turn. Breaking down her core stats, Kamiz possesses a mid-size CMC, a below-average defensive stat block for her cost, and an ability that allows us to make our big creatures evasive and bigger while allowing our smaller creatures to hit twice in combat. Looking more in depth into the first part of this ability, it allows Kamiz to enable herself or another creature to get in for damage reliably with the possibility of growing it thanks to connive. This of course works very well with creatures who possess or can be granted damage-based effects but don't have built-in evasion, ensuring that they can connect more often without having to worry about blockers. And the free connive it comes with is a nice bonus, as it allows us to hit just a bit harder and helps us prune our hands and set up our graveyards in the process. Then the second half of her ability grants another smaller creature double strike, which also works very well with damage-based effects, this time to proc them twice, but is much better if the target already has built-in evasion or has been granted evasion to ensure they can get in to deal that damage. So as we can see, Kamiz is all about enabling our creatures to get in for combat damage and doubling up on their damage triggers, which is why this Precon upgrade will be refining the core build's game plan to ensure that we have the nastiest damage triggers available to both cripple our opponents and benefit ourselves. Of course, that means our creature base will need to be chock full of creatures with on-damage effects, which luckily the core build has in good supply, but we'll be improving on even further to ensure we have plenty of ways to deny our opponents resources, cast and steal their spells, and generate us value every time our evasive and double striking creatures connect. And then we'll further augment our creature base with even more sources to grant them on-damage effects for them to abuse, alongside additional sources of double strike to ensure that more of our creatures can double up on their triggers every time they swing in. So let's show our opponents just how Kamiz operates. They may think themselves safe behind their armies of creatures and arsenal of spells, but for Kamiz they're all just another resource to exploit. Every person can be bought, every spell can be stolen, and every threat can be neutralized. And even when they have nothing left, when she has taken everything from them, they'll never know the name of the one who was responsible. So now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with our creature keepers, we'll of course be aiming to keep the creatures from the core build with the most potent damage triggers, primarily high power creatures with no evasion to make use of the unblockability that Kamiz provides, and low power evasive creatures to make use of her double strike. Starting off on the lower power evasive side of things, we'll be keeping Looter Ilkor, Shadow Mage Infiltrator, and Thief of Sanity, all of which can safely get in for damage and whose card selection, draw, and spell stealing provide the build with solid value, especially when doubled up on. Drana Liberator of Malakir also gets to keep her spot, her damage-based AoE +1/+1 counter distribution quickly growing her and all our other evasive creatures into dangerous threats, and grows them even faster when granted double strike. Then moving on to our bigger entrants, the Legends Dragon Lord Ojutai, Rexel the Risen Deep, and Tivit Seller of Secrets all make the grade. The draw, free spells, and massive value token creation they provide being quite useful for us, and, despite their built-in evasion, can still make use of our commander's unblockability granting to get through on particularly hostile board states. Then closing out our kept creatures, the ninja duo Fallen Shinobi and Silent Blade Oni will be carrying over from the core build as well, their ninjutsu enabling them to sneak into play reliably thanks to our evasive creatures, and their lack of built-in evasion being fully compensated by our commander's ability, allowing them to make maximum use out of their spell-stealing damage effects. Moving on to our instant holdovers, we'll only be keeping some of the more efficient removal options, with Swords to Plowshares and an offer you can't refuse staying in for being dirt cheap removal with minimal downside, along with Obscura Charm, whose counter mode is probably the most useful, but its ability to reanimate or destroy low CMC creatures and walkers still being nice to have access to. Similarly, we'll only be keeping a handful of sorceries from the core build, with Writ of Return keeping its spot thanks to the repeatable reanimation it provides when ciphered onto our evasive creatures, and the board wipes Austere Command and Dust to Dawn staying in as well, the former's customizability allowing us to inflict minimal losses for ourselves while maximizing them for our opponents when we use it, and the latter dodging our smaller creatures and allowing us to recur them back to be used again later. Continuing on to our enchantments, the only one that carries over from the base build is Smuggler Share, whose ability to ramp and draw in response to our opponents doing so themselves makes it a great way for us to keep up with them if we're behind or stay ahead if we're in the lead. Our artifact holdovers are then up next with the Mana Rock Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Azorius Signet, Dimir Signet, Orzhov Signet, and Felwar Stone all making the grade as excellent sources of cheap ramp and or fixing to help build up our mana base, as does Wayfarer's Bauble, which does the same but with lands instead. 3 pieces of equipment also make the cut here, the first 2 being Mask of Riddles and Swiftfoot Boots. The former's evasion granting and damage based draw working very well to get our creatures in and keep our hands full, while the latter can protect our commander from removal to keep her empowering our creatures, or alternatively speed up a creature that just came in so they can swing in immediately. Then the last piece of equipment is Quiet as Spike, whose on-hit life having effect is extremely dangerous if left unanswered, and doubly so if the equipped creature has double strike to reduce the unfortunate target's life down to a quarter instead. And finally, Strionic Resonator makes it in as our last artifact carryover, its ability to double up on our commander's ability or the on-damage effects of our creatures being quite useful, even allowing a creature with double strike to get procced 3 times for a pseudo-triple strike. Then with no walkers to go over from the core build, we'll move straight to our land base, where Command Tower, Path of Ancestry, and Arcane Sanctum all stay in since they can tap for any of our colors in this tricolor build. Darkwater Catacombs, Skycloud Expanse, and Fetid Heath keep their spots since they provide us with some solid filtering to help fix our colors. Sunken Hollow, Prairie Stream, Choked Estuary, and Port Town all make the cut since they tap for 2 of our colors and we're running enough basics to make sure they come into play untapped. Exotic Orchard stays in, as it can usually find us the mana we need off our opponent's lands since we're in 3 colors. Thriving Heath, Thriving Isle, and Thriving Moor all keep their spots for being decent on-demand fixing for any color we may need when they come down. And Myriad Landscape stays in for the ramp it provides our build from our land slot. Rogue's Passage will also be keeping its spot, giving our build another source of evasion outside of our commander to make sure our creatures can get in for damage from the land slot. And finally, all 5 plains, 6 islands, and 6 swamps make it in from the core build as well. That leaves us with a final tally of 61 cards including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 39 cards to upgrade. So now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Starting off with our creature upgrades, we'll be expanding our menagerie of creatures with on-damage effects to make sure we're getting the most value out of them as they bypass blockers or connect twice. For example, Daring Saboteur, Ghostly Pilferer, and Inkfathom Witch will all be cut here due to their resource-dependent evasion or lackluster abilities, being replaced with Grateful Apparition, Thrumming Bird, and Skyship Plunderer, whose built-in flying is a more reliable form of evasion, and their counter-multiplying effects working nicely with the +1/+1 counter our creatures will acquire when they connive. In a similar vein, we'll be swapping out Graveblade Marauder, whose Graveyard Focus Burn and lack of built-in evasion make it not worth running in this build, and exchanging it for Una's Blackguard, whose counter distribution for rogues and ability to grant our creatures a discard on damage effect goes a long way to strip our resources from our opponents, while buffing the handful of rogues we have in our build, including our commander. Speaking of stripping resources away from our opponents, we'll be cutting Nadir Kraken, Chasm Skulker, Cephalid Face Taker, and Identity Thief, whose non-damage based token creation and creature cloning effects can find a better home, and adding in Hypnotic Spectre, Blizzard Spectre, Guldraw Spectre, and Shimmyan Spectre, all of whom can strip resources from our opponent's hands on damage and have built-in evasion, making them particularly dangerous when given double strike to deny our opponents even more cards. Champion of Wit's Lackluster card draw will also be swapped here for another Spectre in the form of Nightveil Spectre, who may not rip cards from our opponent's hands but does let us play and cast them from the top of their deck, which is still a solid form of card advantage for us to have access to. The Legends Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer and Alayla Artful Provocateur will also be swapped out here, each being better off in their own build rather than butting heads with Kamiz, being replaced with 2 other legends in the form of Nashi Moon Sage and Rankle Master of Pranks, the former benefiting from becoming evasive to allow him to steal spells off the top of our opponent's decks more reliably, at worst letting us play their lands if we don't want to pay any life, and the latter's suite of damage-based AoE draw, discard, and edict removal alongside built-in evasion and haste make him a very dangerous creature to give double strike to. Quickly taking a look at our evasion-granting creatures, Whirler Rogue failed to make the grade due to being limited to a single target and not providing any further upside, so it gets replaced with Midnight Pathfinder, who can give our whole board a very interesting form of evasion that bypasses all non-legendaries, and lets us venture into the dungeon on damage to boot, enabling all our evasive creatures to crawl through dungeons with ease to get their benefits as well as their own. Then pivoting back to hand disruption but with a twist this time, Misfortune Teller and Skyway Robbers, whose on-damage based effects are a bit limited, will be exchanged out for Keru Mind Eater and Fiend of the Shadows, both of which not only rip cards from our opponent's hands on damage but also let us play them, adding insult to injury by not only taking our opponent's resources from them but then using them against them as well. Aerial Extortionist, whose temporary exile and draw may be a better fit for a more flicker-oriented build, then gets the axe in favor of Dazzling Sphinx, whose on-damage free spell from our opponent's deck, built-in evasion, and low enough power to reasonably give it double strike with our commander, makes for a dangerous combination that allows us to get multiple free spells each turn. Moving on to some more draw-focused entries, the suboptimal Daxos of Miletus and Custodi Lich get cut here for some superior card advantage sources for us, those being Dimir Cutpurse and Grazzelax Lithid Scholar. The former tacking on discard to the draw to deny our opponent's resources, and the latter giving board-wide on-damage draw that synergizes very well with our evasive creatures. Nearly at the end now, we'll be swapping out a high CMC Archon of Coronation and Sun Titan, who are both powerful creatures but lack effects that get the most mileage out of our commander, and replacing them with Necropolis Regent and Demon of Wailing Agonies. The former's permanent stat doubling per swing for all our creatures, making our boards grow out of control very quickly, and the latter's on-damage Edict removal working very nicely to pick apart our opponent's boards, not to mention both our big evasive beatsticks that can just crack in for damage on their own. And finally, we'll be swapping out the non-creature spells Jailbreak, Treasure Cruise, and Nightmare Unmaking, whose effects are fine but lose out since this build can make better use of more creatures with on-damage based effects. For the legends Zareth San the Trickster, Esperia the Inscrutable, and Metamai the Ageless, whose on-damage creature reanimation, tutoring for most of our creature base, and ability to generate us extra turns serve as nasty top ends to help push for lethal and close out games. Moving on to our instant upgrades, we'll be aiming to power up our counterspell suite by replacing Change of Plans, Commit to Memory, and Obscura Confluence, whose effects are largely fine but we'll be replacing for the more control-focused options consisting of Counterspell, Arcane Denial, and Dromar's Charm, all of which give our build more spell disruption to protect against wipes or other types of threats that can either blow out our board state or give our opponents the win. And for our last instant change, we'll be swapping out Utter End for being a tad bit too mana hungry for Despark instead, which is half the price and still exiles permanents, though it is restricted to higher CMC spells, but that usually won't be an issue as we'll usually be targeting them anyway. Then with no new additions to our sorceries, we'll move straight to our enchantment upgrades, which we'll be using to add some additional sources of double strike and on-damage effects. Firstly, In Too Deep is going under alongside Life Insurance, the removal and ramp they provide being very solid but ultimately better suited for other builds, and being replaced with Duelist's Heritage and True Conviction, each of which give our build access to more double strike and, in the latter's case, can certainly win us games on established boards by granting it to all our creatures. Then we wrap up our enchantment changes by taking out Profane Command, which is a bit too slow for us to use here, and Stolen Identity, which is a powerful effect but a tad bit expensive for us to use in the build, for Rogue's Class and Reconnaissance Mission, each of which give us more sources of card advantage for us to take advantage of either from our opponent's decks or our own. That trend then continues as we proceed to our artifact changes, where we'll be switching out Mask of the Schemer, which may be better suited for more graveyard-focused builds as graveyard setup, for Bident of Thassa, giving our build another AoE damage-based source of card advantage for redundancy. And for some more individual sources of card advantage, we'll be swapping out the mediocre lands Ash Barrens and Esper Panorama, whose fixing really isn't necessary here, for Rogue's Gloves and Mask of Memory, further allowing our evasive creatures to fill up our hands on contact, and getting even better when they're granted double strike for double the draw. Then switching gears from draw to ramp, the basic Commander Sphere and the more discard-focused Currency Converter will be replaced with some more damage-focused forms of ramp, those being Prying Blade and Goldvein Pick, the treasure they provide on contact ensuring we have plenty of mana to burn, and generating the mana we need to cast our opponent's spells off of sources that don't cast them for free. And for our last artifact addition, we'll be swapping out the removal spell Lethal Scheme, which is a fantastic removal option, just not in this build, as most of our creatures will be too busy attacking to convoke it out, and adding Brass Knuckles in its place, our build having enough other pieces of equipment to enable two of our creatures to get double strike off of it, which is a fantastic rate. And finally, for land upgrades, we'll be aiming to speed up our mana base by swapping out Temple of Silence and Creeping Tar Pit, both of which come into play tapped, for Caves of Kolios and Shine Shadow Snarl, the former coming into play untapped by default, and the latter usually coming into play untapped due to our large volume of basics, and lastly swapping out Obscura Storefront for Access Tunnel, replacing the slow fetch with an untapped land that grants evasion to our smaller creatures if needed. So now that we've covered all 39 cards we'll be upgrading from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 32 creatures including the Commander, 7 instants, 3 sorceries, 5 enchantments, 17 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 27 creatures with damage triggers, 15 cards that grant damage triggers to others, 24 creatures that are evasive in one form or another, 5 cards that grant evasion to other creatures, 9 cards that remove cards from our opponent's hands, 5 cards that allow us to play our opponent's cards for their cost, 6 cards that let us play our opponent's cards for free, 7 cards that multiply or distribute +1/+1 counters, and 4 cards that grant double strike to other creatures. giving us a solid amount of creatures who possess damage-based effects and ways to grant them even further damage-based effects for them to abuse the unblockability and double strike our commander provides them with, a good number of which are evasive or have ways to be granted evasion from other sources, and plenty of ways to rip our opponent's resources right out of their hands, use their own resources against them, make our creatures bigger, and grant more of them double strike to make them even deadlier. For general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, leaving us with a fairly typical number of core stats. Looking at our mana curve, we have 5 1-drops, 22 drops, 14 3-drops, 9 4-drops, 8 5-drops, 6 6-drops, 1 7-drop, and 1 9-drop. Our curve being a lighter mid-game one that aims to drop small creatures with damage triggers early, followed up by our commander to allow them to either crack in safely or double up on their damage triggers if they already have built-in evasion, building steadily towards our larger creatures as we deny and steal resources from our opponents. The final price then comes out to be $74.67 after upgrades. This price is not including tax and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For additional upgrades, the Slowlands Shipwreck Marsh, Deserted Beach, and Shattered Sanctum all help speed up our mana base significantly, while Rafine's Tower is a great tri-land to help further fix our colors while also having cycling in case we need to draw instead. Cephalid Constable, Thada Adel Acquisitor, and Ashling the Extinguisher all possess powerful damage-based effects but lack evasion, making them all perfect to work alongside our commander to get in for damage more reliably, while Grim Hireling, Sword of the Animist, and Wand of Orcus all grant potent damage-based effects to help us get more value and or grow our board state. And for those who want to spend some real money to get some real powerful effects, Mindleech Mass, Sphinx Ambassador, and Lord of the Void all give us powerful means to steal and cast our opponent's spells from their hand or deck, but we'll still have to pay for them with our hard-earned cash despite them casting those stolen spells for free. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. With Obscura Operation covered, our next Precon upgrade will be covering Cabaretti Cacophony and its face commander, Kit Kanto Mayhem Diva, so look forward to a tokens build featuring her soon. But before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.